Have here in the studio Dumabioluwale to help us. Duma, I don't know if you listened to President Trump yesterday, but I mean, I think 1 minute, and when he wanted to start talking about Greenland, it was like, do you want me to talk about Greenland? Oh, I didn't want to talk about Greenland. I'm like, but you know the reason you're here is because of Greenland and everything. But the market had one way of reaction after that. But then he went to his Truth Social and said that he had reached a preliminary understanding on Greenland after talks with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, a move he claims has eased tensions. And we did see that in the market, oil market numbers this morning. But there are other markets other than oil, even though oil seems to be the biggest.
Yes. I mean, at this point, it's very clear that VUCA is still a very prominent thing happening across the global markets. And by VUCA, I mean volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. So we're at that point where there's a lot more uncertainty around the global economic environment and what is likely to happen. In fact, what we are seeing right now is more scenario-based, analysis across the board of what could likely happen. In fact, yesterday I saw an article about the uncertainty of uncertainty. So right now it's an art to understand how to navigate uncertainty because of the current global environment that we're in. But speaking about the U.S. Greenland issue and how Trump and then the current update on it, what we have seen is not so much as a 360-degree change, but more of like a 180-degree pullback on what was likely to be the case. So we have moved from a conversation of brute force on the takeover of Greenland to now, we're trying to maintain some level of sanity around the entire process. In fact, in quote, it was called a framework of an understanding between the NATO Secretary General and Trump. Now, what that means for the global economy and markets in general is multi-pronged. And when we start with the fact that, okay, with the current update that we have right now, what we're likely to see is, first of all, the conversations around a breakaway of the NATO alliance is now unlikely. So, which means that especially because of the tariffs that the Trump said they were going to issue on European countries that were not going to be in support, or they were not in support of the Greenland takeover. So that tariff, right, in conversation has been dumped. So that means that there's some level of respite in that regard.
But I wonder, Dumebi, if we can actually say that, President Trump, he can wake up on another side of the bed and have another idea and then think, because nothing is concrete yet. Nothing is written, nothing is agreed or signed yet. So anything can still happen. Yeah, while that is true, I think it's extremely important for us to kind of contextualize how important it is for that alliance to remain in place. The U.S. is not living in isolation when it comes to the NATO alliance, right? As much as as much as Europe is benefiting from, U.S. support in terms of security and defense, it's not so far-fetched that there's some level of support as well coming from European countries for the U.S., right? So it's a mutual beneficial agreement, or we'll say relationship, that the broader global environment will benefit if it remains intact. And I think that would be the focus of keeping that alliance intact. Now, whether or not there will still be conversations around the Greenland takeover or no Greenland takeover, I think the core of what is likely to be, which was because we're coming from a world where there were questions around the NATO alliance actually probably, dissolving. And now the question now is, most likely this is not going to be the case, at least for now. Who knows? Tomorrow that conversation might coming. But I think that at the core of it all, on a global level, it benefits all parties that the alliance remains intact on a security level, on a defense level, on a trade level, right? And I think that that would be the focus for the NATO Secretary General and even for the United States. I think the other thing to note here is how important it is
to how important Greenland is in the Arctic region and why this conversation is even happening, right? We're now living in a world where rare earth materials or rare earth minerals have become very prominent for the transition of the global economy, right? From renewable energy to the electric vehicles. And remember that Europe and US and even the United Kingdom are very big on renewable energy, climate finance, climate change, and all of that. And Greenland right now is somewhat a hub for a lot of the materials and minerals that are needed to sustain this drive and this push on a global level, right? From copper to uranium. And remember, uranium is very useful for defense materials, right? So when you think about what is happening within the US and Europe and Russia and China, you realize how strategic Greenland is for them to sustain the momentum against their against Russia and China, to maintain the trade, will I say trade war or pushback against both countries.
So what's happening, all of this, how does it impact the rest of the world, especially emerging economies?
Yes, so I will start off with factor number one. As interesting as this situation is and how somewhat bearish it might look, it actually points to the fact that there is strong demand for these rare earth minerals. And it means that there's an opportunity for emerging markets to open up their markets.
Because they have a lot of resources.
Resources, exactly. So even in Africa here, we see how, giving the example of DRC, for instance, with DRC in 2025 putting a ban on cobalt exports, we saw how significant that impacted the global market, right? And that tells you how much there is demand for these commodities or these resources, and how much more emerging markets and frontier markets can prepare themselves to benefit from this global demand or this surge in global demand. Then you also consider the fact that there is the BRICS, right? And how this issue would likely give more strength to that bloc. From Russia to China, right? You see that there is an increase in focus of these two markets towards emerging and frontier markets. We're seeing a lot more memorandum of understandings happening between Russia and China across emerging markets, even smaller Francophone African countries. We're seeing them, you know, really come up to support and provide a lot of...
and you know, Egypt seems to be receiving a whole lot of attention.
Yes, because of how strategic they are. Yes, for global trade.
A lot of MOU, a lot of grants and agreements coming the way of Egypt.
And the expectation is that it's going to likely continue, right? And what this just tells us pretty much is how that, number one, like I said, there's an opportunity for emerging markets to take place. But more importantly is what this now looks like for trade and investment between Russia and China in emerging and frontier markets. The expectation is that that is going to increase. So what we'd likely see is more of a trade-like competition or competitiveness between the Western world and Russia and China for Africa or emerging markets. Those are two things that would likely increase. One last thing to mention is the fact that the upsurge on safe haven assets would likely continue. So we've seen gold prices rise.
We've seen gold, copper, silver,
and the expectation
record highs.
The expectation that that's also going to continue. More importantly, because there is that demand, and then all of the uncertainty is pushing investors towards
why are they not pushing investors to crypto?
Well, there's still, while the world is adopting digital currency, we're in that age, truth be told is that investors, a lot of times, traditional investors and countries like to deal with what is physical, right? And that's the way I would put it. What they like to deal with what is physical in terms of currency, assets, things that they can quantify, right? Not because there is not demand for that, or investors are not actually putting that. But the thing is, there's a lot of volatility in that space, a lot of understanding that still needs to go on there, right? And so investors would rather do what they know
with their money.
With their money. And even when you look at the portfolio, not because they're not investing, but a larger share of their investment goes to from fixed income. Then you now go to safe haven assets, and then you go to crypto.
All right, Dumebi, thank you so much for helping us understand President Trump more.
Thank you for having me.
Dumebi is the manager at a financial derivatives company, and of course, talking to us about what happened or some of the consequences we can expect on the conversations going on at the World Economic Forum.